Old Sophia lived in a grand mansion that sat on top of a hill overlooking the city. From the outside, her life looked perfect. She had everything a child could want. Beautiful clothes filled her closet, the latest gadgets covered her desk, and her bookshelves were packed with stories from around the world. But Sophia lived in a different world than most kids her age. Born deaf, she experienced life through her eyes, through touch, through vibrations she could feel in the wooden floors when someone walked heavily nearby. Her world was beautiful in its own way, but often lonely. Her father, Ricardo Martinez, was one of the richest men in the country. His tech company had changed how people used their phones, making him millions. He loved his daughter deeply and had learned sign language when she was first diagnosed as an infant. In those early days, he would spend hours signing with her, telling her stories with his hands, making her giggle with silly facial expressions that were such an important part of their silent conversations. But as his company grew bigger, Ricardo traveled more. Board meetings, investor calls, and business trips took him away from home for days, sometimes weeks. This time, just 2 days before Sophia's birthday, he had been called away on an emergency trip to Singapore. "I'll make it up to you when I get back," he had promised, his hands moving quickly in the familiar patterns of their shared language. "We'll have the biggest party ever with all your favorite things." Sophia had smiled and nodded, but her eyes didn't light up like they used to. She'd heard this promise before. Last Christmas, last summer vacation, last birthday too. The morning of her birthday, Sophia woke up to a text message from her dad with a picture of a beautiful sunrise over Singapore's skyline and many heart emojis. No video call. He must have been too busy. She sent back a quick thank you and a heart, then got ready for her day. The mansion was never empty. Mrs. Patel, the housekeeper, had worked for the family since before Sophia was born. There were also 3 maids, a chef, a gardener, and 2 security guards who rotated shifts at the front gate. They were all kind to Sophia, always smiling and waving when they saw her. Mrs. Patel had even tried to learn some basic signs, but she often mixed them up in a way that made Sophia smile. But it wasn't the same as having real conversations. Most of their communication happened through written notes or simple gestures. None of them could really talk with Sophia about her thoughts, her dreams, or the book she had just finished, reading that made her cry at the end. The chef had prepared her favorite, breakfast, blueberry pancakes with whipped cream shaped like a smiley face. Mrs. Patel had put a small wrapped gift next to her plate. Inside was a pretty bracelet with tiny silver stars. Sophia thanked her with a hug, but as she looked around the big, empty dining table, she felt a heaviness settle in her chest. The staff had arranged for a special lunch too, and had ordered a fancy cake from the best bakery in town. Mrs. Patel showed her a picture of it on her phone. 3 layers of chocolate with raspberry filling, decorated with delicate sugar flowers. Sophia nodded and smiled, but inside she wondered what the point of a birthday cake was when there was no one to share it with who could sing happy birthday in her language. After breakfast, Sophia wandered through the large house, trailing her fingers along the cool marble walls. She passed through the game room with its pool table and huge TV screen, through the home theater with plush seats where she sometimes watched movies with captions, and into her father's study, where his presence lingered even when he was gone. On his desk was a framed photo of the 2 of them from years ago. Sophia was maybe 5 years old, sitting on her dad's shoulders at the beach, both of them laughing. She picked it up, studying their happy faces, trying to remember what that day had felt like. She put the photo down carefully and went to the large window that looked out over the gardens. The gardener was trimming some bushes near the fountain, carefully shaping them into perfect rounds. Everything in this house was always perfect, always in its place. Sophia decided to go outside. Maybe fresh air would help her feel less alone. She slipped on her shoes and headed out to the garden, finding a stone bench near the roses where she could sit and feel the gentle warmth of the spring sun. The roses were her mom's favorite. Sophia barely remembered her mother, who had died when she was just 3 years old. A car accident, her father had explained when she was old enough to understand. Sometimes Sophia wondered if things would be different if her mom was still here. Would her birthday feel special then? Would someone be sitting beside her on this bench, hands moving in conversation instead of her sitting alone? From her pocket, Sophia pulled out the small notebook she always carried. In it, she wrote down thoughts, drew little pictures, or jotted questions she wanted to ask her dad when he had time. She flipped to a clean page and began to write. Birthday wish someone who sees me. It wasn't about the presents or the cake. Sophia had plenty of things. What she wanted, what she had wished for every birthday since she could remember, was connection. Someone who wouldn't just look at her with pity or kindness from a distance, but someone who would enter her silent world willingly, someone who would make the effort to truly communicate. As the morning stretched into afternoon, Sophia watched a pair of butterflies dance around the garden, chasing each other in loops and spirals. She smiled at their beautiful silent ballet. At least they had each other. Her stomach growled, reminding her it was almost lunchtime. Just as she was about to head back inside, she noticed a car coming up the long driveway. It wasn't her father's sleek black car or one of the usual delivery vans. This was a small, slightly dented blue car that had seen better days. Sophia stayed on her bench, curious. The car parked near the side entrance where deliveries usually came. A man stepped out, carefully lifting a large white box from the passenger seat. He wore a simple outfit, jeans and a blue shirt with a bakery logo on the pocket. He must be bringing her birthday cake. The man looked around, seeming a bit intimidated by the grand house. Then his eyes found Sophia sitting on the bench, and something changed in his expression. He didn't just glance at her and look away, as most strangers did. Instead, he looked directly at her with a warm, genuine smile. Little did Sophia know that this simple cake delivery was about to change her birthday in ways she couldn't imagine. The heaviness in her chest lifted slightly as she returned his smile, not knowing yet that this stranger would be the one to finally see her, truly see her, for who she was. David Chen was exhausted. His alarm had gone off at 4:30 that morning, same as every Saturday, so he could get to his weekend job at Sweetie's Bakery by 5 a.m. The fancy bakery in the upscale part of town paid better than his weekday job as a school custodian, and every dollar mattered when you were raising a son on your own. He rubbed his tired eyes as he carefully placed the 3-tiered chocolate raspberry cake into his old blue Honda. The cake had taken the bakery's head decorator 3 hours to finish, with delicate sugar flowers and gold-dusted leaves cascading down one side. The receipt showed a price that was more than David made in 2 days of work. Rich people, he muttered to himself, but without any real bitterness. Life had taught him that money didn't equal happiness. He had seen plenty of wealthy families come into the bakery who barely spoke to each other while ordering their expensive treats. As he drove through the city and up into the hills, where the mansions grew larger and the gates more imposing, David thought about his own son, Leo. At 11 years old, Leo was the center of David's world, smart, kind, and always ready with a joke to make his dad laugh even on the toughest days. Today, they had plans to go to the park and play board games afterward, a simple birthday celebration for one of Leo's friends next week. Not fancy, but Leo never complained. His son understood their situation better than any kid should have to. David checked the address on his phone again as he approached an enormous iron gate. The Martinez estate? He had heard of Ricardo Martinez, of course. Everyone in the city knew about the tech billionaire whose company had revolutionized smartphone technology. David's own phone was 5 years old and had a cracked screen, but it got the job done. He pressed the intercom button, announced himself, and the gate swung open silently. The driveway seemed to go on forever, curving through perfectly manicured grounds before revealing a mansion that looked like something from a movie. Fountains, marble columns, floor-to-ceiling windows that probably cost more than David's entire apartment building. Just drop off the cake and go, he reminded himself as he parked near what looked like a service entrance. Don't gawk like a tourist. As he carefully lifted the cake box from the passenger seat, David spotted a girl sitting alone on a stone bench in the garden. She was maybe around Leo's age, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and wearing a pretty blue dress that looked brand new. Something about her caught his attention. Not just her obvious wealth, but the way she sat so still, watching him with curious eyes. There was a sadness about her that seemed out of place on what was clearly her birthday. David had delivered hundreds of birthday cakes over the years, and usually there was excitement in the house. Balloons, decorations, kids running around. This place was eerily quiet for a child's birthday. A woman in a housekeeper's uniform appeared at the side door, waving him over. "The birthday cake for Miss Sophia?" she asked with a slight accent. "Yes, ma'am," David said, carefully handing it over. "Need me to help set it up anywhere?" The housekeeper hesitated. No, that's all right. The party is, well, Mr. Martinez had to travel unexpectedly. Business emergency, she lowered her voice. Poor child spending her birthday alone again. We staff try our best, but it's not the same. David glanced back at the girl on the bench. So that was Sofia Martinez, daughter of one of the richest men in the country, sitting all alone on her birthday. Is that her? He asked. In the garden? The housekeeper nodded. She's deaf since birth. Such a sweet child, so smart too. Reads more books than most adults I know. We try to communicate with notes and some basic signs, but none of us are fluent in sign language like her father. Something clicked in David's mind. She uses sign language? Yes, American Sign Language. Why do you ask? David smiled. My son's best friend at school is deaf. I've been learning sign language for the past year so I could talk with him when he comes over to our apartment. The housekeeper's eyes widened. You know sign language? Just the basics, David admitted. I'm not great at it yet, but I can have a simple conversation. He thought about his own son waiting at home and how lucky they were despite their financial struggles. They had each other. This girl, surrounded by luxury, seemed to have no one who could really talk to her on her birthday. Before he could overthink it, David made a decision. Would it be okay if I said hello to her? I've got my delivery receipt signed already and I have a few minutes before my next stop. The housekeeper looked surprised but nodded. I think she would like that very much, Mr. Chen. David Chen. As David walked across the immaculate lawn toward the stone bench, he mentally reviewed the signs he knew. His signing was basic and sometimes clumsy, but Leo's friend had always appreciated his efforts, saying that trying to communicate was what mattered most. The girl, Sophia, watched him approach, curiosity replacing the sadness in her eyes. She sat up straighter, clearly wondering why the cake delivery man was walking toward her instead of leaving. David stopped a respectful distance away and raised his hand in greeting. Then, with careful movements, he signed, Hello, happy birthday. The change in Sophia's expression was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened slightly in surprise, and then a smile spread across her face that transformed her completely. She sat up straight, her hands immediately moving in response, signing so quickly that David could barely follow. He laughed and held up his hands in a slow-down gesture. Sorry, he signed. I am still learning. Please sign slower. Sophia nodded eagerly, her excitement palpable. She slowed her signing, carefully forming each word. You know sign language, really? A little, David signed back. My son's friend is deaf. I learned for him. His grammar wasn't perfect, but the message got through. Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes, though her smile never faltered. With deliberate movements, she signed, Thank you for talking to me. Today is my birthday. I am 12. 12 is a good age, David signed back. My son is 11. His name is Leo. He fingerspelled Leo, one of the first things he'd learned in sign language. Sophia's hands flew up to fingerspell her own name in response, and David nodded to show he understood. There was something powerful in this simple exchange, a connection forming through gestures where words had failed. Are you having a birthday party? David asked, though he already knew the answer from what the housekeeper had told him. Sophia's smile dimmed slightly. She shook her head. My dad is in Singapore. Business trip. The staff is nice, but... She shrugged, the gesture communicating volumes about her loneliness. David felt a pang in his heart. He looked at his watch, thinking about his next delivery. Then back at the girl whose face had lit up just because someone had tried to communicate with her in her own language. Making up his mind, he signed, I have an idea. Would you like to meet my son? We were going to play games at the park today. You could join us. The hope that blazed across Sophia's face made David's decision worthwhile before she even responded. She nodded vigorously, then held up one finger in a wait gesture before running toward the house. David watched as she spoke to the housekeeper through a quick exchange of signs and written notes on a small pad. The housekeeper looked over at David with surprise, then back at Sophia, who was signing emphatically. After a brief discussion, the housekeeper approached David with Sophia bouncing excitedly behind her. Miss Sophia tells me you've invited her to play games with your son, the housekeeper said, a mix of confusion and hope in her voice. I would need to accompany her, of course, and get proper permission. David nodded. Of course, or an idea struck him. My son and I were just going to the public park about 10 minutes from here, and then home to play board games. We could bring our games here instead if that would be easier. The housekeeper considered this, then smiled. That might be best for a first meeting. If you're truly willing to do this on your delivery route. My shift ended with this delivery, David admitted. I was heading home to pick up Leo anyway. The decision was made quickly after that. David would go home to get Leo and their board games, then return to the mansion. The housekeeper, Mrs. Patel, he learned, would clear it with security and prepare some snacks for the impromptu birthday gathering. As David walked back to his car, Sophia waved from the garden, her entire posture transformed from the sad, lonely girl he'd first seen on the bench. Now she was bouncing slightly on her toes, hands clasped in excitement. Driving down the winding road from the hilltop mansion, David couldn't help but smile. His simple gesture of using the few signs he knew had clearly meant the world to Sophia. He thought about how differently they lived, his modest apartment with second-hand furniture versus her marble-floored mansion. Yet how similar the need for connection was for everyone. He dialed Leo's number as he drove. His son answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad, are you done with deliveries?" "Almost," David replied. "Listen, how would you feel about a change of plans today? I met someone who could really use some friends on her birthday." As he explained the situation to Leo, David could hear the same compassion in his son's voice that he hoped he'd instilled in him. Despite their own challenges, they had always tried to help others when they could. A deaf girl all alone on her birthday? That's just wrong, Leo said firmly. Let's bring all our best games. And Dad, can we stop and get some candles for her cake? Everyone should have candles to blow out on their birthday. David smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. That's a great idea, buddy. I'll be home in 20 minutes. As he hung up, David realized that this delivery, which had seemed like just another job this morning, had turned into something much more meaningful. Sometimes life's most important moments came disguised as ordinary days. Today might have started as just another Saturday work shift, but it was becoming something neither he nor Sophia would forget. The cake box sat forgotten on the kitchen counter as Mrs. Patel bustled around, preparing a tray of snacks. Sophia couldn't stop looking out the window, waiting for the blue car to return. Every few minutes, she would turn to Mrs. Patel and sign, "Are they coming?" And each time the housekeeper would smile patiently and nod. Sophia had never felt this kind of excitement on her birthday before. Usually there would be expensive gifts and formal dinners with her father's business associates, where she would sit quietly, feeling like a display piece rather than a birthday girl. The adults would smile at her and sometimes write notes saying happy birthday or what a lovely young lady, but none of them could really talk to her. But today, a stranger, a cake delivery man, had seen her and spoken her language. Even though his signing was basic, even a bit clumsy, he had tried. That meant more to Sophia than all the fancy gifts her father's money could buy. She had changed into her favorite jeans and a comfortable t-shirt, leaving the formal dress her father's assistant had picked out hanging in the closet. Today wouldn't be like other birthdays. Today, for once, she would just be a kid. When the security guard called to say David Chen and his son had arrived at the gate, Sophia nearly jumped out of her skin with excitement. She ran to the front door, ignoring Mrs. Patel's gentle reminder to walk like a lady. The blue car came up the driveway, looking even more out of place in daylight against the mansion's grandeur. David stepped out first, now wearing a casual t-shirt instead of his work clothes. From the passenger side emerged a boy about Sophia's age, with the same kind eyes as his father. He carried a stack of board games under one arm and a small paper bag in his other hand. Sophia waved enthusiastically from the doorway. David waved back, saying something to his son, who looked up at the mansion with wide eyes before spotting Sophia. The boy gave a friendly wave, too. When they reached the front steps, David signed, "Hello again. This is my son, Leo." He finger-spelled Leo as he had done earlier. Leo stepped forward with a shy smile. To Sophia's surprise, he raised his hands and signed slowly but clearly. "Happy birthday. Nice to meet you." Sophia's heart soared. Both of them knew sign language. She signed back quickly, "Thank you. Do you know ASL too?" Leo looked at his dad, who interpreted the rapid signs. Leo nodded and signed carefully, "A little. My friend Raj at school is deaf. Dad and I learned together." His signing was even more basic than his father's, but the effort meant everything. Most people in Sophia's life didn't bother to learn more than a few token signs, if that. Her father knew ASL fluently, but he was rarely home. The household staff tried their best with simple gestures and written notes, but real conversations were rare in Sophia's daily life. Mrs. Patel appeared behind Sophia, welcoming their guests warmly. "Please come in. I've prepared some snacks and we can set up in the game room or the garden, whichever Miss Sophia prefers." Sophia signed quickly, and David translated with a smile. "She says the game room, please. And she wants to know what's in the paper bag." Leo grinned, holding up the small bag. "Birthday candles. Dad said you had a cake but maybe no candles. Everyone needs to make a wish on their birthday." When David signed this to Sophia, she clasped her hands together in delight. Such a simple thing, candles for a cake, but no one had thought of it until this boy she'd just met. Mrs. Patel led them through the mansion's vast entryway with its soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. Leo tried not to stare at the artwork on the walls or the marble statues in the niches, but his eyes kept wandering. David placed a gentle hand on his son's shoulder, grounding him. The game room was large and well equipped with a pool table, pinball machines, a huge flat-screen TV, and shelves of board games that looked barely touched. Despite all these expensive toys, there was a sterile quality to the room, like a display in a store rather than a place where a child actually played. Leo set down his stack of worn board game boxes next to the pristine ones on the shelf. The contrast was striking. His games had tattered corners and faded colors from years of use and enjoyment. Sophia watched as Leo unpacked his games: Monopoly with a taped box, a chess set with one replacement piece clearly handmade, card games with edges soft from handling. These games had stories, had been played and loved. Her own games looked new because they were rarely used. There was no one to play with. Mrs. Patel brought in a tray with sandwiches, fruit, and cookies, setting it on a table before excusing herself to fetch the cake. When she returned with the elaborate three-tiered creation, Leo's eyes widened. "Wow," he said, forgetting to sign. "That's the fanciest cake I've ever seen." David signed Leo's words to Sophia, who shrugged with a small smile. She signed back, "It's pretty, but I'd rather have friends than fancy cake." When David translated, Leo nodded vigorously. "Friends are better than cake any day, but friends with cake is the best." This made Sophia laugh, a bright, uninhibited sound that seemed to surprise even Mrs. Patel, who looked up sharply before smiling to herself. Leo pulled the pack of colorful candles from his paper bag and began placing them carefully around the top tier of the cake. There were 12 candles, one for each year of Sophia's life, plus one to grow on. As Mrs. Patel lit the candles, their warm glow reflected in Sophia's eyes. She had blown out birthday candles before, of course, but always surrounded by her father's business associates or alone with the staff. Never with kids her own age who were there simply because they wanted to be, not because they had to be. They all sang happy birthday, Leo and David with their voices and all three of them with their hands, signing the words in ASL. Mrs. Patel watched with damp eyes as Sophia's face glowed with happiness in the candlelight. Sophia closed her eyes, made her wish, and blew out all 13 candles in one breath. Everyone clapped, both with their hands in the air and in the deaf way, with hands waving above their heads. As Mrs. Patel cut the cake, David asked Sophia through signs, "What games do you like to play?" Sophia's hands hesitated. The truth was she rarely played games. Sometimes her father would play chess with her when he was home, but that wasn't often. She pointed to Leo's stack of games with a questioning look. Leo understood immediately. He spread out his games on the table, explaining each one with a mixture of signs and gestures when he didn't know the right sign. David filled in the gaps, but often Leo and Sophia found their own way to communicate, developing a shorthand of gestures and expressions that bridged the gap between Leo's beginner signing and Sophia's fluency. They decided to start with Uno, a simple card game with colors and numbers that required minimal explanation. As they played, something magical happened. The awkwardness of new acquaintances melted away, replaced by the universal language of play. The disappointed groan when Leo had to draw 4 cards, the triumphant smile when Sophia played her last card, the dramatic sigh when David realized he was about to lose. Sophia had never laughed so much on any birthday. Leo was naturally funny, making exaggerated faces when the game went against him. David was warm and patient, helping with communication but never talking down to either child. For the first time, Sophia didn't feel like the deaf girl or the millionaire's daughter. She was just Sophia, playing cards on her birthday with friends. After Uno came Monopoly, with David helping to explain the rules through signs. Sophia proved to be a shrewd property investor, quickly acquiring a monopoly on the green properties and building hotels. Leo groaned dramatically each time he landed on her spaces, counting out his dwindling money with comic reluctance that made Sophia giggle. Mrs. Patel checked in occasionally, her expression softening each time she saw Sophia's animated face and flying hands as she explained her game strategy or reacted to a lucky dice roll when David missed a sign or couldn't remember how to express something. Sophia would help him, showing the correct way to form a sign. He was an eager learner, repeating the signs until he got them right, thanking her for her patience. In turn, Sophia began picking up some of the Chinese phrases Leo and David occasionally used with each other, repeating them carefully until father and son nodded approvingly. It was a beautiful exchange, not just a game being played, but a bridge being built between different worlds. The wealthy girl in her mansion learning simple Chinese phrases from the struggling single father. The delivery man and his son learning refined ASL from a girl who rarely had anyone to sign with, each giving the other something valuable that had nothing to do with money. As the afternoon stretched on, they moved from board games to the pinball machine, where Leo showed a surprising talent, racking up high scores that made Sophia clap in delight. David tried his hand at pool, admitting with a self-deprecating smile that he hadn't played since college. Sophia revealed that despite having the table in her game room for years, no one had ever taught her how to play. That led to an impromptu pool lesson, with David showing both kids how to hold the cue, how to line up shots, how to think about angles and force. His large hands gently guided Sophia's smaller ones on the cue stick, showing her how to form a bridge with her left hand. When she sank her first shot, the look of pure accomplishment on her face was worth more than all the expensive toys in the room. Throughout the afternoon, they developed their own unique way of communicating, a blend of ASL, spoken English, which Sophia could partially lip-read, gestures, facial expressions, and even the few Chinese phrases Sophia was picking up. It wasn't perfect or fluid, but it was genuine and heartfelt. At one point, when they paused for more cake and drinks, Sophia signed something that David couldn't quite follow. She repeated it more slowly, but he still looked confused. Leo watched the exchange, then suddenly said, "I think she's asking if we can come back again sometime." David raised his eyebrows at his son. "You understood that?" Leo shrugged. "Not the signs exactly, but..." He gestured to his own face. "I could tell from her eyes. That's what she wants to know." Sophia nodded vigorously, confirming Leo's interpretation. She looked at David with hopeful eyes, her hands forming the question again, more deliberately this time. "Will you come back?" The question hung in the air, weighted with more than just a request for another playdate. It was a plea for connection, for friendship, for a break in the isolation that defined so much of her life. David looked around at the luxurious room, then back at Sophia's eager face, so different from the sad, lonely girl he'd first seen on the garden bench. He thought about the vast differences in their lives, his struggle to pay rent and put food on the table versus her life of material abundance but emotional poverty. In that moment, those differences seemed insignificant compared to the simple human connection they had formed. With careful, deliberate signs, David answered, "Yes, we would like that very much." The joy that spread across Sophia's face transcended any language barrier. In that moment, they all understood that something important had happened here. Not just a birthday celebration, but the beginning of something new, something precious. The afternoon stretched into early evening, and what had begun as a simple kind gesture had transformed into a full-blown birthday celebration. None of them seemed to notice the hours passing as they moved from one game to another, their laughter and animated gestures filling the once silent game room with life. After pool came a heated round of foosball, with Leo and Sophia teaming up against David. Their teamwork was remarkable considering they'd only just met. Leo would call out strategies that David would quickly sign to Sophia, and she would respond with tactical suggestions of her own, her hands flying in excitement. The children beat David 3 games in a row, their victory dances growing more elaborate each time. No fair. David protested with a good-natured smile, signing as he spoke. You two are ganging up on me. Sophia's response was a mischievous grin and a quick sign that made David burst out laughing. What did she say? Leo asked curiously. She said old people like me are too slow for foosball, David translated, pretending to be offended. Old, I'm only 38. This sent both children into fits of giggles, Sophia's silent laughter just as expressive as Leo's vocal one. Mrs. Patel appeared in the doorway, a fond smile on her face as she watched the scene. In her 20 years working for the Martinez family, she had never seen Sophia so animated, so truly happy. The girl who usually spent her days reading alone in the garden or her room was now playing like the child she was meant to be. Miss Sophia, Mrs. Patel called, waiting until the girl looked her way. She held up 6 fingers, then pointed to her wrist where a watch would be. Sophia nodded in understanding. It was 6 o'clock. Usually this would be dinner time, followed by her evening routine of reading or watching captioned TV until bedtime. But today was different. Today she didn't want the normal routine. Today she wanted this feeling to last. She turned to David and signed quickly. Can you stay for dinner? When David hesitated, clearly calculating his own evening responsibilities, Sophia added, Please, it's still my birthday. How could anyone resist those pleading eyes? David checked his watch, then nodded. We can stay a bit longer, Mrs. Patel beamed. I'll tell the chef to prepare something special. Perhaps we can eat in the garden? The evening is so lovely. As they followed Mrs. Patel through the mansion's vast hallways toward the garden, Leo whispered to his father, This place is like a museum. David nodded, understanding what his son meant. Despite its grandeur, or perhaps because of it, the Martinez home had a sterile quality, like a showcase rather than a home. The furniture was pristine, the decorations perfectly placed, but there were few signs of the messy, lived-in feeling that made a house a home. No family photos lined the walls, no children's artwork was proudly displayed on the refrigerator, no shoes lay forgotten in the hallway. The garden, however, felt different. As the sunset painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the outdoor space came alive with natural beauty. Fairy lights twinkled in the trees, having clicked on automatically at dusk. The fountain burbled pleasantly, and the roses gave off a sweet scent that perfumed the evening air. The chef had outdone himself, preparing a feast of finger foods that were easy to eat while sitting on the garden's plush outdoor furniture. There were tiny sandwiches cut into star shapes, fresh fruit skewers, crispy vegetable spring rolls, and miniature pizzas topped with colorful vegetables. This is amazing, Leo said, his eyes wide as he took in the spread. Way better than the mac and cheese we were going to have at home. David gave his son a gentle nudge, but Sophia just smiled. She picked up a notepad that Mrs. Patel had thoughtfully placed on the table and wrote, I would love mac and cheese sometime. We never have it here. This simple statement spoke volumes about the differences in their lives. Leo, who sometimes complained about having the inexpensive dish too often, couldn't imagine never getting to enjoy it. Sophia, who had access to gourmet meals prepared by a professional chef, longed for the simple comfort food she'd never tried. As they ate, the conversation continued through their unique blend of signing, speaking, writing, and expressive gestures. Sophia was curious about Leo's school, his friends, his hobbies. Leo wanted to know what it was like living in a mansion, if she had a swimming pool, if she ever got lost in her own house. David watched the children's exchange with a warm heart, occasionally helping with translation, but mostly letting them find their own way to communicate. Sophia learned that Leo loved soccer and played on a local team, that he was good at math but struggled with spelling, that he had a collection of rocks he'd found on various adventures with his dad. Leo discovered that Sophia was an avid reader who could finish a thick novel in a day, that she played the piano beautifully despite never hearing the notes, and that she knew the name of every star in the major constellations. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Sophia pointed upward with excitement, then began signing the names of the constellations becoming visible above them. David translated for Leo, who gazed upward in wonder. How do you know all that? Leo asked, genuinely impressed. Sophia wrote on her notepad, Books. And my dad bought me a telescope for Christmas last year. I spend a lot of time watching the sky. There was something poignant about this admission, this girl who lived in silence finding companionship in the distant silent stars. David felt a tug in his chest, a mixture of sadness for her loneliness and admiration for her resilience. After they finished eating, Leo had an idea. "Can we play hide and seek? This garden is perfect for it." Sophia's face lit up at the suggestion. She nodded eagerly but then paused, looking concerned. She wrote on her pad, "But how will I know when you call out that you found me?" Leo thought for a moment, then grinned. "We'll use flashlights. Instead of calling found you, we'll shine the light. And for game over or come out, we can flicker the lights 3 times, everyone can see that." David translated, adding, "That's a great idea, Leo. Is there somewhere we can borrow some flashlights, Sophia?" Sophia nodded and led them back inside to a utility closet where Mrs. Patel kept emergency supplies. They each took a flashlight, and David explained the adapted rules once more to make sure everyone understood. The game began with Leo counting, and David signing the numbers for Sophia, while Sophia ran to hide in the vast garden. The joy on her face as she darted behind a large topiary was infectious. For perhaps the first time in her life, her inability to hear wasn't a disadvantage, or something that set her apart. The game had been adapted so naturally to include her that it felt seamless. Hide and seek in the sprawling garden turned out to be magical. The fairy lights provided just enough illumination to see pathways without revealing hiding spots, and the fountains and statues offered perfect concealment. They played round after round, each taking turns seeking while the others hid. During one round, David was it, and searching for both children. After finding Leo relatively quickly behind a garden bench, they searched together for Sophia. Minutes passed with no sign of her. They checked behind trees, under tables, beside statues. Finally, a movement caught David's eye. High up in the branches of an oak tree, Sophia was perched like a bird, grinning down at them. "How did you get up there?" Leo called out, forgetting momentarily that she couldn't hear him. David shone his flashlight on Sophia, signaling she'd been found, then signed Leo's question. Sophia's response was to gracefully climb down, revealing the skill of someone who had spent many hours in that very tree, likely with a book and the desire to escape into her own world. As the evening progressed, Mrs. Patel brought out blankets for them to sit on the lawn, watching the stars come out in full force. The night was clear, the stars brilliant against the dark sky. Sophia pointed out constellations, teaching Leo and David the signs for their names. While Leo shared stories he knew about the mythological figures the star patterns represented. In this quiet moment, with the children lying on their backs pointing at the heavens, David felt a profound sense of rightness. What had begun as a simple cake delivery had become one of the most meaningful days he could remember. Somehow, in trying to bring joy to a lonely girl, he and Leo had received an unexpected gift themselves, a reminder of how the simplest human connections could transcend all barriers of language, wealth, and circumstance. The spell was broken by the sound of David's phone ringing. He checked the screen and saw it was his neighbor, who was expecting them home hours ago. "We should probably get going," he said reluctantly, signing to Sophia as he spoke. "It's getting late." The disappointment on both children's faces was immediate and identical. Sophia's hands moved in a flurry of signs that David struggled to follow in the dim light. "Slower, please," he signed. She took a deep breath and signed more deliberately. "Can't you stay longer? Just a little bit?" David felt torn. On one hand, it was a weeknight and Leo had school tomorrow. On the other hand, the connection forming between these two children seemed too precious to cut short. Before he could respond, headlights swept across the garden as a car came up the long driveway. It wasn't his old blue Honda, still parked by the service entrance. This was a sleek black luxury car with tinted windows. Sophia's whole body tensed. She signed quickly. "It's my dad. He's home early." David felt a sudden awkwardness wash over him. What would the billionaire Ricardo Martinez think about finding a delivery man and his son, spending the evening with his daughter? Would he be angry? Would he assume the worst about David's intentions? As the car pulled to a stop at the main entrance, Sophia jumped to her feet. There was something desperate in her expression as she signed to David. "Please don't leave yet. I want you to meet him." David nodded, understanding how important this was to her. He stood up, straightening his casual clothes self-consciously, and placed a reassuring hand on Leo's shoulder as they watched the car door open. Ricardo Martinez stepped out, his tailored suit showing no signs of the long international flight he must have just endured. He was a tall man with features that matched Sophia's. The same expressive eyes, the same strong jawline. He looked tired but brightened instantly when he saw his daughter running toward him. What happened next took David by surprise. Rather than offering her father a polite, formal greeting as might be expected in such a wealthy household, Sophia launched herself into Ricardo's arms. The businessman caught her in a tight hug, spinning her around once before setting her down. His hands immediately began to sign, moving with a fluency that made David's basic skills seem clumsy in comparison. "Happy birthday." "High star," Ricardo signed, the affection in his expression needing no translation. "I caught an earlier flight." "I couldn't bear to miss your whole day." Sophia's hands flew in excited response, too quick for David to follow. She was clearly telling her father about the day's events, her face animated as she described the games, the cake, the stars. Then she turned, gesturing toward David and Leo with obvious excitement. Ricardo looked up, noticing the strangers for the first time. His expression shifted from surprise to curiosity as he walked toward them, Sophia bouncing along beside him. "Hello," he said, his voice warm but questioning. "I don't believe we've met." David stepped forward, extending his hand. "David Chen, sir. I delivered your daughter's birthday cake this afternoon. This is my son, Leo." Recognition dawned on Ricardo's face as Sophia signed rapidly beside him. The bakery delivery. But you're still here hours later?" There was no accusation in his tone, just genuine confusion. Sophia continued signing, explaining in her silent language what had transpired. As Ricardo watched her hands, his expression softened, then grew emotional. "You know sign language?" he asked David, his voice reflecting disbelief and something deeper. "Perhaps hope. Just the basics," David admitted. "My son's friend at school is deaf, so we've been learning together for about a year now. When I saw Sophia alone on her birthday," he shrugged, not knowing how to explain the simple human impulse that had led him to reach out to a lonely child. Ricardo's eyes filled with tears that he quickly blinked away. "You have no idea what that means," he said quietly. "What you've done today." He looked at his daughter, who was now showing Leo how to sign something new, both children laughing together. "I haven't seen her this happy in years." The vulnerability in this powerful man's admission caught David off guard. Here was one of the richest men in the country, confessing that a simple act of kindness from a delivery man had given his daughter something his billions couldn't buy. Ricardo turned back to David, his expression serious but warm. "Mr. Chen, I don't know how to thank you properly for what you've done today, but I'd like to try." He hesitated, then added, "Would you and your son consider staying for a while longer? I'd like to get to know the people who have brought such joy to my daughter's birthday." David looked at Leo and Sophia, now sitting together on the blanket, pointing at the stars again, their heads close together in the comfortable way of new friends who felt like old ones. "We'd be honored, Mr. Martinez," David replied, feeling none of the awkwardness he'd expected. "And please call me David." Ricardo smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his tired face. "Only if you call me Ricardo." As the two fathers walked toward their children, David felt that this unusual birthday celebration was far from over. In fact, it felt like something important was just beginning. 3 weeks later, David's blue Honda turned up the now familiar driveway of the Martinez estate. The security guard waved him through with a friendly smile. He was a recognized visitor now, no longer required to stop and explain his presence. In the passenger seat, Leo bounced with excitement, a backpack full of comic books and games at his feet. This was their 4th visit since Sophia's birthday, each one longer and more comfortable than the last. "Do you think Sophia finished that book I lent her?" Leo asked, referring to a dog-eared science fiction novel he'd insisted his new friend would love. "I'm sure she did," David replied. "That girl reads faster than anyone I've ever met." As they pulled up to the house, they saw Sophia waiting on the front steps, waving eagerly when she spotted their car. Beside her stood Ricardo, his usual business suit replaced by casual jeans and a simple button-down shirt. The transformation was striking. He looked younger, more relaxed, more like a dad than a CEO. The past few weeks had brought changes for everyone. What had begun as a simple act of kindness on a lonely girl's birthday had blossomed into a genuine friendship between two families who, on the surface, couldn't be more different. David parked the car, and Leo was out the door before the engine had fully stopped, running to meet Sophia. The two children immediately began their unique communication, a blend of sign language, which Leo was learning with impressive speed, gestures, and the occasional written note when needed. David approached more slowly, smiling at Ricardo as he climbed the steps. "Good to see you again," Ricardo said, extending his hand. The formality of their first meeting had given way to a comfortable rapport. "You too," David replied. "No emergency trips to Singapore this week?" Ricardo chuckled. "Not this week. In fact, I've made some changes to my schedule." He glanced at his daughter, who was showing Leo a new sign with animated gestures. "I've realized some things are more important than being at every board meeting." The two men watched their children for a moment, both feeling the simple joy of seeing their kids happy. There was something poetic about their friendship. The deaf girl and the hearing boy, finding ways to bridge the gap between their worlds. "Shall we?" Ricardo gestured toward the garden, where Mrs. Patel had set up a picnic lunch under the shade of the oak tree that Sophia loved to climb. As they walked, Ricardo seemed thoughtful. "I wanted to talk to you about something, David. An idea I've been considering." David nodded, curious. Over their previous visits, he'd come to respect Ricardo not just as a successful businessman, but as a father who genuinely loved his daughter, even if his demanding career had often kept them apart. They settled at the picnic table, the children sitting cross-legged on a blanket nearby, absorbed in their own conversation. Mrs. Patel brought out sandwiches, fresh fruit, and lemonade, simple fare that felt more appropriate than the elaborate meals usually served in the mansion. "I've been doing some research," Ricardo began, "about programs for deaf children in our city, or rather the lack of them." He sighed, looking over at Sophia. "When my wife died, I threw myself into work. I learned sign language for Sophia, enrolled her in the best schools with specialized resources, hired tutors. I thought I was doing everything right." David listened quietly, sensing that Ricardo needed to share this. "But I missed the most important thing." Ricardo continued. "She needed connection, friends, community, all. The money in the world couldn't give her that." He looked directly at David. "Until you came along with your son and those birthday candles." David shook his head modestly. "We just treated her like any other kid." "Exactly," Ricardo said emphatically. "Not as a project, not as a disability to manage, but as a person. And you made the effort to communicate with her in her language." He paused. "That's what gave me the idea." From his pocket, Ricardo pulled a folded document and handed it to David. "I've established a foundation. The Sofia Martinez Foundation for Deaf Education and Community Building." David unfolded the paper, scanning the professional letterhead and formal language. "This is wonderful, Ricardo. What will the foundation do?" "Many things," Ricardo replied, his eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "Funding for ASL classes in public schools, resources for families of deaf children, scholarships, technology development." He leaned forward. "But we need someone to run it. Someone who understands the importance of building bridges between deaf and hearing communities." David looked up, beginning to understand where this was heading. "I want you to consider being the foundation's director," Ricardo said directly. "Full salary, benefits, complete creative control of programming." David blinked in surprise. "Me? But I don't have experience running a nonprofit. I'm a school custodian who delivers cakes on weekends." Ricardo smiled. "You're also someone who saw a lonely deaf girl and knew exactly what she needed. Not pity or expensive gifts, but communication and friendship. That's the insight I need for this foundation." He gestured to where Leo and Sophia sat, now teaching each other silly hand games, their laughter filling the garden. "Look what you've already built with just one small gesture." David felt overwhelmed. The offer would completely change his and Leo's lives. No more struggling to make rent, no more working multiple jobs just to get by. More importantly, it was meaningful work that could help many children like Sophia. "I don't know what to say," David admitted. The sun streamed through silk curtains in Sofia Martinez's room, casting gentle patterns on her bedroom floor. "At 12 years, say you'll think about it," Ricardo replied. "That's all I ask." Before David could respond, Sophia came bounding over, tugging Leo behind her. Her hands flew in excited signs as she looked between her father and David. Ricardo laughed, signing back to her. He turned to David. She wants to know if we've told you about the ASL classes yet. ASL classes? David asked. Leo grinned. Sophia's dad is paying for our whole school to have ASL lessons. Even the teachers have to learn. That way Raj won't be the only deaf kid no one can talk to. David looked at Ricardo in surprise. The businessman shrugged. A small first step while we set up the foundation. I spoke with your son's principal last week. That's amazing, David said, genuinely moved by the gesture. Sophia signed something else, looking eagerly at her father. Ricardo nodded. Ah, yes, the other news. He turned to David. Sophia has enrolled in Leo's school for the fall semester. With a full-time interpreter, of course. David's eyebrows shot up. She's leaving her private school? She is, Ricardo confirmed. It's an excellent academic institution, but socially... He shook his head. She was the only deaf student there. Isolation dressed up in a fancy uniform isn't what she needs. Sophia nodded emphatically, her hands moving in a flurry of signs that made Leo laugh. She says, Leo translated, his signing skills now good enough to catch the meaning, that she'd rather have real friends than a fancy science lab. Ricardo watched his son translate with pride in his eyes. 3 weeks ago, my daughter spent her birthday alone because I prioritized business over being her father. Today, she has a best friend who's learning her language, a new school where she won't be the only one who's different, and, he looked at David meaningfully, hopefully, a foundation that will help other deaf children find the connection she's found. David felt a tightness in his throat. I'll do it, he said, the decision feeling right in his heart. I'll run your foundation, Ricardo beamed, extending his hand. As they shook, Sophia clapped her hands in delight, clearly having followed enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Leo looked between them, confused. What just happened? David put his arm around his son's shoulders. Our lives just changed, buddy. For the better, I think. As the afternoon wore on, the two families shared their meal, played games, and talked about the future. Plans were made for summer activities before the new school year began. Camping trips, swimming lessons for Sophia, who had a pool but had never learned to swim properly, visits to the science museum that Leo loved. When the time came for David and Leo to leave, Sophia didn't look sad as she had after their first visit. Instead, she signed confidently, See you Tuesday. Don't forget to practice your new signs. Leo nodded, signing back with growing skill. I will. And you finish that book. The children hugged, and David was struck by how natural their friendship had become. How completely they'd overcome the barriers of different languages, different abilities, different worlds. As David and Ricardo walked toward the car, the businessman put a hand on David's shoulder. You know, when I was flying home from Singapore on Sophia's birthday, I was feeling guilty for missing it. I never imagined that my absence would lead to something better than anything I could have planned. David nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes the most important moments come from the smallest gestures. A delivery man who knew a few signs, Ricardo mused, looking back at where their children stood, still signing to each other. Who would have thought that would change so many lives? 3 months later, the Sofia Martinez Foundation for Deaf Education and Community Building opened its doors in a bright, modern space downtown. The logo, designed by Sophia and Leo together, showed 2 hands reaching toward each other, one signing, one learning. David stood in his new office, still amazed at the turn his life had taken. On his desk was a framed photo from Sophia's birthday, not the formal portrait Ricardo had commissioned from a professional photographer, but a candid shot Mrs. Patel had taken on her phone. In it, Sophia was laughing as she taught Leo how to sign best friend, their faces alight with the simple joy of connection. Beside the photo was a list of the Foundation's first initiatives. ASL classes in 20 public schools, a summer camp for deaf and hearing children, a technology grant for developing better communication tools, scholarships for deaf students pursuing education degrees. A knock at his door made David look up. Ricardo stood there, Sophia beside him, both of them smiling. Ready for the ribbon cutting? Ricardo asked. Sophia signed excitedly. Lots of people already outside. News cameras, too. David nodded, taking a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. As the 3 of them walked toward the main entrance where a crowd had gathered, David thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a lonely birthday and a simple act of kindness had grown something powerful. Not just a foundation with its programs and resources, but a bridge between worlds that had seemed impossibly far apart. Outside, Leo waited by the ribbon stretched across the entrance, holding a large pair of scissors and grinning broadly. The crowd included families with deaf children, educators, community leaders, and many curious citizens drawn by the media coverage of Ricardo Martinez's new philanthropic venture. Sophia stepped forward to join Leo at the ribbon. Together they would make the ceremonial cut, the deaf girl and the hearing boy who had become inseparable friends. As cameras flashed and the ribbon fell, David caught Ricardo's eye. The two men shared a look of understanding, both knowing that while the foundation would help many children, the most important bridge had already been built between two families who had once been strangers. That evening, after the ceremonies and speeches were done, the four of them sat in Ricardo's garden under the stars. Sophia and Leo were teaching each other constellation names, their hands moving in the language they now shared. Ricardo and David sat nearby watching their children with quiet contentment. "You know," Ricardo said softly, "all my wealth, all my business success, none of it matters compared to this." He gestured to where Sophia was laughing silently at something Leo had signed. Seeing her happy, seeing her connected to the world, that's the only real success. David nodded, understanding completely. In his new role, he would have financial security he'd never dreamed of, meaningful work that made a difference, and the satisfaction of building something important. But watching his son and Sophia, he knew that the true wealth was in these moments, in the connections between people, in bridges built across differences, in the simple human gestures that could transform lives. The millionaire and the delivery man sat side by side in comfortable silence, two fathers united by their children's friendship and the unexpected journey that had brought them all together. Above them, the stars continued their silent dance across the sky, witnessed by a girl who had once watched them alone, but now shared their beauty with a friend who was learning to speak her language. In the gentle evening light, it was impossible to tell where one world ended and another began. The bridge between them was complete.